April 14, 1865, Washington, D.C. Ford's Theater. Thousands of people were laughing and clapping. Up in the presidential box sat America's 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. He was smiling too. After 4 long years of civil war, the country was finally at peace. You could see relief and hope on Lincoln's face, but at that very moment, a man was quietly climbing the stairs in a dark corner of the theater. He had a small pistol in his hand and anger in his heart. His name was John Wilkes Booth. In just a few minutes, the shot he fired would change American history forever. This isn't just the story of one moment, it is the story of a bigger plot involving several people who planned for months. Their goal was to strike at the top leaders of the government, all on the same night. Let's go back a little to understand how it all happened. In the 1860s, America was split in two, the northern states called the Union, and the southern states called the Confederacy. The main issue was slavery. The southern economy depended heavily on it. When Abraham Lincoln became president in 1860, he made it clear that slavery should not spread any further. The southern states didn't accept this. One by one, they left the Union, and in 1861, the Civil War began. The war lasted 4 years. It was incredibly costly. In April 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered. The Union won. Slavery ended. But deep anger still burned in the hearts of some Southern supporters. John Wilkes Booth was a well-known actor at the time, handsome, charismatic, and popular on stage. He came from a wealthy family in Maryland. On the outside, he seemed successful, but inside, he was a strong supporter of the South. He blamed Lincoln for destroying the Southern way of life. Around 1864, Booth started making plans. At first, he wanted to kidnap Lincoln and trade him for Confederate prisoners. He gathered a small group of people to help him, including David Herold, Lewis Powell, George Atzerodt, and a woman named Mary Surratt. They studied Lincoln's daily routine for months, but their plans kept falling through. Then, in April 1865, the Confederacy fell. Kidnapping no longer made sense. That's when Booth decided on a much bigger and more desperate plan: to attack several top leaders on the same night: President Lincoln, Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Secretary of State William Seward. He believed this would create chaos and give the South a chance to rise again. On the morning of April 14, 1865, Booth went to Ford's Theater. He knew the president and his wife would be attending the play Our American Cousin that night. Since he was a famous actor, the staff knew him well and allowed him to move around freely. He carefully checked the presidential box. Then he prepared a small piece of wood to block the door from the inside. After that, he met with his group to finalize their roles. That night, the theater was packed. When Lincoln arrived with his wife Mary and 2 guests, the crowd cheered. The guard assigned to protect the box left his post early to watch the play. As a result, the door to the presidential box was left unsecured. Around 10:15 p.m., Booth quietly entered the box. He blocked the door and waited. Inside the theater, the audience burst into laughter at a scene on stage. In that brief moment of distraction, Booth made his move. Lincoln was struck and slumped forward. Chaos erupted in an instant. Booth jumped from the box to the stage below. He injured his leg during the escape, but still managed to flee the theater. At the same time, the other parts of the plan were also unfolding. Lewis Powell arrived at Secretary of State William Seward's residence and carried out an attack. Seward survived, though he was seriously injured. George Atzerodt, who was assigned to target Vice President Andrew Johnson, lost his courage. He never carried out the attack. Back at Ford's Theater, doctors rushed to help President Lincoln. He was carried across the street to a small room in the Peterson House. Despite all efforts, his condition was critical. The next morning at 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln passed away. War Secretary Edwin Stanton is famously remembered for saying, "Now he belongs to the ages." Booth and David Herold fled on horseback. They traveled through Maryland and eventually stopped at the home of Dr. Samuel Mudd, where Booth's injured leg was treated. Booth believed his actions would be seen as heroic by supporters in the South. But that belief was deeply mistaken. Most people, including many in the South, condemned what had happened. 12 days later, Union soldiers tracked Booth down to a barn in Virginia. Booth refused to surrender. The barn was set on fire to force him out. During the confrontation, Booth was shot and later died from his injuries. The other people involved in the plot were later captured and brought to justice in a military trial. 4 of them received the death penalty, including Mary Surratt, who became the first woman executed by the United States government. Others were given long prison sentences. The nation was heartbroken. Lincoln's funeral train traveled from Washington to Illinois. Along the route, thousands of Americans stood beside the tracks, waiting in silence, just to say goodbye. Lincoln's death brought deep sadness, but his legacy did not end there. Slavery was officially abolished with the 13th Amendment, and the country remained united. Even today, more than 160 years later, questions still remain. Why was Lincoln's guard not at his post? Were there others involved? And why are some documents still sealed? What is clear, however, is this. John Wilkes Booth believed that a single act could change the course of history and help the South. But the result was very different. Lincoln's death did not divide the nation further. Instead, it strengthened his place in history as one of America's most respected and remembered presidents. The red chair where Lincoln sat that night still remains inside Ford's Theater.